That's you, Brent. Sorry.
Oh, hello. Yeah, no worries. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to PWD Allies podcast. My name is Brent Frain. I'm the host. Today I have Cheryl Hardcastle joining us. Hello, Cheryl. How are you?
Hi, good to be back with you, Brent. Congrats on 150 episodes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Marker, yeah, good to have our people with disabilities and allies keeping the conversation going, keeping rising above the noise, and trying to make meaning for people and give some kind of hope in the middle of all that noise. It's very discouraging sometimes, and I don't know where you want to start, but people are struggling. We've had a couple nail biters in BC. I shouldn't say a couple. You had the big election, and now in Saskatchewan, and then with the federal government talking about immigration. I think in all of the discourse that's happening, like, the bottom line is that we have to strengthen our social safety net. And it's an easy way to start with the Canada Disability Benefit that's coming on board, and revamp it so that it can actually do some of the work. And this idea that changing immigration policy is going to be this fix for suffering that's happening now is very disconcerting for people living with disabilities. And all the advocates that are saying, you know what, we have some systemic issues, problems here. There's no human rights accountability in our frameworks. Mm-hmm. And to still be talking about $200 a month for a Canada Disability Benefit after all the input that they've had, I'm actually anxious for a fall economic statement from the federal government, and let's see if anything's been digested from all of the good comments, and not just comments, but good scholarly, academic, statistical arguments that are evidence-based, very thoughtful recommendations. Let's see if anything changes with that $200 a month.
Well, you mentioned an interesting thing about disability rights, Cheryl. Actually, this is one thing that I haven't shared on the podcast since I've done that. But about 2 weeks ago, I think you know, Cheryl, because you've been around the podcast for a while now. So yeah. you kind of know that my situation of my clawback here provincially of my survivor's pension, right? It's been 11 plus years. I've got every month I get my survivor's pension clawed back, and the province just ignores it, right? They just claw it back. So after 11 years of this, I finally decided, you know what, I'm gonna elevate my complaint to the federal level. So now I've submitted a complaint to the Canadian Commission for Human Rights. It's the first time I've done that, and we also put out a short the other day about the fact that the BC Human Rights Tribunal here in 11 years, they never want to talk about, that clawing back a protected pension is not. They say, well, that's not discriminatory, Neil, but it's protected. It's a protected pension, so it should be. But anyway, so I just wanted to let everybody know on the podcast that I finally, after 11 years, I've elevated my complaint. It's down to the federal level, and I basically, the way I framed it is I've said that the provincial governments are behaving like bullies, schoolyard bullies, and the federal government knows this is going on. They know what's going on, and they're kind of letting the provinces be bullies. When I believe the federal government could step in and say, you shouldn't do that. So on the federal government watch, they're watching provincial governments go take the money away and go, oh well, it's fine, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know what your feedback on that is, but
well, a couple things come to mind, but one of them just really immediately gets more to the technical issue of it. Like you're saying, the federal government, that comment you just made kind of a minute ago, the federal government says, like, okay, when the province claws back, where does that money go? Like you're talking about from a protected pension, but other people have other, like other situations where there's a clawback. So let's picture a clawback literally. Mm-hmm. Who's keeping that? Who benefits from that clawback? Is it the province, or is it going back to the original disperser of the funds?
I think it's I think it's the province. The provinces use it to help fund their social assistance programs. They steal from the poor to give to the poor. So they basically take money from me and they give it to somebody else on the system, but they use it to fund their system.
So they don't have to fund it with taxation and revenue. Like, so there's something wonky about. I've always found that issue itself to be like highly suspicious. And there's ways that we need a clawback when you're still living in poverty, no matter what measure. I hesitate because I know there's different low income measures that are used in different jurisdictions and for different things. But in general, we have an idea, like if you're making under $30,000, that is considered poverty, right?
Yeah.
So if you're below, like how low do you have to go?
Yeah.
And how high do you, like, can you make 36,000 before, can you make, like,
well, here
I just feel like, are we not supposed to be helping people, like, not just tread water, but like get their necks out of the water?
Well,
exactly.
Here in BC, you're allowed to make $15,000 of exempt income, right? So they have that income exemption, but the problem is they say that protected pension monies, like guaranteed protected pension monies, are not exempt. And I mean, of course they should be, because they're protected, guaranteed. A pension is a protected guarantee. And they're saying, well, no, it's not, and they claw it back. So it's just bananas to me. It's just bananas.
Like during our provincial election that we just had on October 19th, 2024, the voters basically came out in full force and said enough is enough. Like they wanted change, the affordability. I mean, high market rents. I mean, cost of living. You name it, and nothing was really addressed. And unfortunately, we are again now at a slim majority government, razor thin, and I'm hoping that the affordability crisis that people are going through is going to get addressed. And I mean, strengthening our social safety nets. I mean, that should be number one priority for all levels of government, for not just in BC, but all the way across Canada. And it's it goes to show, because the Canada Food Bank, organizations across the country have now come out with a new report stating that in the month of March of this year, over 2 million, that's right, 2 million people have visited the food bank in 1 month. And it goes to show that poverty can be dealt with by strengthening the social safety net. But unfortunately, the Liberal government and the Conservative government, they just kind of put a blind eye to it and pass the buck back and forth. Not our problem. And I just don't want to see people suffering in poverty. I mean, there's a lot of people that are like working full-time jobs. I mean, more than one full-time job, and they still have to go to the food bank. There's a problem there.
Yeah, and we were talking about food banks before we hit record here, and
just trying to keep it on our topic about like issues surrounding disability and how we advocate and how we see this path to change. Like, where do we have to forge this path now, and how do we do it? Just in keeping with that, I just want to go back to this idea of the clawbacks and working. When you're at, I don't care how far below a poverty, like when you're suffering, I know there are people above the poverty line that have like $12 a month of discretionary spending. So how far over are you, right? It's relative. So when we're talking about people at the lowest end of our economic spectrum, I don't know why we talk about this idea of clawbacks, and especially for people living with disabilities that have the ability to work. When you're talking about margins that are so narrow and people suffering, and the suffering, I mean, like just the physical stress, when you have stress and the like all of that, right? We talk about I'm saying we, but so far what I mean is the government narrative about clawing back for people who are working and earning, because they're trying to incentivize work somehow. They want work to be incentivized, but they're disincentivizing work.
Totally.
Because, like, that's not what happens. You would incentivize work if you put people at a comfortable, guaranteed basic income, call it what you want, Canada Disability Benefit, a collective of social programs that add up so that you can tread water, and then you have the energy that you can get your ears out of water if available. Like, I know I'm using metaphors about it, but
like a base floor.
That's a really hard concept for people to understand about poverty, not just because it's regional, but because different people are in different situations no matter what, and have all these expenses and these responsibilities and costs that come up, right? In different areas. Like, you might live somewhere like I do that has very poor public transportation. So it's very car centric, and it's very expensive to have a bus pass, but a bus pass isn't reliable for not just for work, but for timely appointments. You know, it would take you a whole day. You have to start at 6 a.m. if you want to make sure you're at an appointment for 9. Like, all kinds of practical issues in one region can impact a decision that you make that's economical, and in another place it might be more like market rents or something. So it's very hard. But the thing that we never get away from when we talk about, it's always more expensive for someone living with a disability. The cost, the added cost of a person living with a disability is not parsed out enough. And we really need to have more people talking about their own stories, because the data that's collected is very weak to be able to make arguments on behalf of people living with disabilities. There's no mechanism really in place about accountability. It's more about information collection, but not just about like, what do we do with this now? And this accountability and this transparency. Here's what we found. Not just a follow-up. Here's what we propose to do about it. We don't have. That's not how any of our human rights dialogue takes place, and that's a weakness in not just the country in terms of its human rights accountability internationally, which we should be doing, but we don't have good mechanisms in place for that. But also, you know, we signed and ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of People Living with Disabilities.
13 years ago?
Plugging in. Yeah. This, you know, we're supposed to be plugging all of this in, and we're not. So it's so frustrating to keep talking about it and know that there's no responsiveness. I guess that's got to be the most discouraging part for you. Like we said, congrats about 150 episodes and people listen.
This is 151 now. Yeah.
But what? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But what? You know, like what kind of responsiveness do we actually get from a government? Like how desperate does it?
I wanted to just quickly go back to what you just said earlier, Cheryl, because you hit the nail on the head for me when you said that that work is not incentivized for people with disabilities. Like it should be, but they
that's the way that.
So like they basically say you're allowed to work, but like, you know, I worked for 20 years and I paid into CPP for 20 years. My first wife paid into her CPP for, it was almost 20 years. And so that is an incentive to work. And then the provincial government says, well, thanks for working. We're just going to disrespect that incentive. That incentive, right? And so
disincentivizing,
it totally is.
Well, especially when you go to collect it, and then they say, okay, well, you paid into it. Now we're going to take it off you.
You paid into it, but you're not going to get it. Yeah. Thanks.
I mean, and that kind of goes to show with like when we started mentioning about the election. Now in the platform for the current BC government, they have it in there where waiting on the Canada Disability Benefit for next year in 2025 of July 2025. But people are living in poverty now, like they need help now. And so again, it actually creates more poverty having to wait because you keep getting, you know, your cost of living goes up, you get your rent increases go up. I mean, general cost of living up. I always say be proactive and actually deal with it now. And then if the CDB does kick in, once they get it all fixed up, and because the regulations are completely out of whack, you know, and they were told, federal government was told, do not do it this way. And they went ahead and did it that way anyway. And so it's unfortunate that people have to suffer in poverty. And I always like to be proactive and find solutions to the problem and get to the bottom of it.
It can be overwhelming, and you know, more power to you, Brent, because like so many people, they burn out, right? Like you can only carry this torch for so long. It's very frustrating as well. It took it to a new level, I think. The social phenomenon of the pandemic and seeing how nimble, how quickly a government can respond.
Oh yeah, especially a CERB.
You know, so exactly. So it adds another layer of frustration, right, when we're talking about CBD and the Canada Disability Benefit. And that's top of mind for people, I think, still now, because this public consultation period where comments were welcome, I think it was until like last month, till September 23rd. So now how responsive are they going to be to these comments? Because some organizations made their very well thought out engagement on this issue with the federal government. They made their reports public and had it all thought out. I just feel like, yeah, I would like to see, does this fall economic, that would be the next opportunity.
The fall economic.
Will that acknowledge at all? Will this fall economic statement at all, will it acknowledge at least some of what's been heard? Like, for instance, well, I think it was in July. I think we last visited in June, and then over the summer in July, there was a parliamentary report, and I think it was MP Mike Morris during HUMA had asked questions in April and got answers at HUMA committee. And anyway, some numbers came out, and like, it's only going to benefit after about 10 years. You're going to see like 25,000 people lifted out of poverty or something like that.
Right.
And
I was like,
what
wow.
the heck is happening?
And our e-petition, by the way, should be getting some comments soon from it's going to be presented in the House, right?
Yeah, the E5047.
E5047. What I wanted to say too, Cheryl, is we talk about disability rights, and I think why that's important is, I mean, there's so many people, like, not just me, not just Brent, but I mean, basically, there's so many people all across Canada with disabilities, and that are so preoccupied with kind of self-advocating for ourselves every single day, right?
Yeah.
And like, again, if you just take my example, like, I'm one of how many tens of thousands, right? But if you just take my one example of my fighting the clawback it's been in over 11 years, like I said, there's lots of people in my position that are facing the clawback issue like me. But there's a lot of people that just get burnt out and decide, well, after a year of doing it, they say, well, that's it, I'm tapping out.
I can't.
And I mean, it's been 11 years for me, and you think I would have given up too, but it's just one of those things, like it's not that I have to be right. That's not what it is.
No,
I don't have to be right. I just want to correct a big wrong. That's what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's the principle of it too, like, whether it's yours, your wages that you're talking, that, like, that pension is deferred wage.
Yeah, exactly.
You're telling me I'm not entitled to the pension, then I want those wages back.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I'm not a legal expert on it, but when you have a protected pension and it's not really protected.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a pension is, right? It's
just
supposed
rhetoric,
to be,
right? Yeah.
There's always reasons why to claw back income. I mean, if you give the person what they're entitled to, that income that it was paid into, I mean, it betters the person's well-being, their for who they are, and they can put the money back into the economy. But when you don't do that, it creates more poverty.
And again, that's why disability rights are so important, because if we had the disability rights in place, then you wouldn't have people burning out left, right, and center, saying, well, I can only fight for 1 year and I'm going to tap out and give up.
I think people just become so overwhelmed. They have no choice.
Yeah.
Like, they just shut down. They just can't do it anymore.
Well, it's like when we had Michael Prince and Neil Belanger on, and they had put recommendations in to HUMA, and it was very detailed all the way down. And then they just shut them down. And it's really sad.
Yeah, it is. And just going back to that advocacy issue and just being like, let's just say that everybody, like, they want to apply for a CBD. And the way that it's proposed right now, you're gonna, like, to have the disability tax credit as eligibility. How many people have been burned out or overwhelmed and just gave up on that one?
Yeah.
Well, all the
very hard to negotiate. aside from the financial barriers and very practical barriers to it, if you don't have a family doctor, and I think it's like a 24-page form.
Yeah.
It's this proposal that this eligibility requirement will be the disability tax credit, the DTC, and then you have to apply separately anyway.
First.
It seems like an unnecessary step. You can make some regulatory changes in that disability tax certificate. Like, none of it makes sense to me if you're trying to be fiscally responsible and you're trying to achieve what you say you're trying to achieve with the disability, with the Canada disability benefit. Now, all of this is counterintuitive, that process that's being...
You know what I'm worried about, Cheryl, is like, I have the DTC, so I'm not worried about that piece. But what I am worried about is that they've lowered the bar so much for what they consider a poverty level. So, for example, like in my case, like I have a son, right? And so I'm getting the child tax benefit every month. So I'm thinking to myself, maybe that child tax benefit is actually going to put me over. And then they'll say, well, now you don't qualify for the for the CDB now.
Well, because
that's one of the other criticisms, isn't it? As a Service Canada benefit, you don't want this to be something that is now, now you're getting clawback because you're getting this and this and this too.
It just seems so gated. It just seems so gated, everything.
It's based on household income.
If it was a refundable tax credit, which has been argued, if it was made a refundable tax credit, it would solve that issue that you're talking about. Right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know, maybe that'll be a simple solution for them that they will adopt.
Are things ever simple? I don't know.
I don't know, but that's a simple solution to that conundrum. Right? You may be impacted in other social programs that you're getting right now, unless they treated it in a different category and did that.
I mean, it's so easy to make it streamlined right across. It's like what Mike Morris had mentioned, is to simplify it. I mean, you have a disability, it doesn't go away. So, I mean, feds already know who's on provincial already through CRA because they have the tax information from the provincial government. So people on disability or income assistance is T5007, right? So they already know, CRA already knows that information. So it's so easy for them just to streamline it right through. Boom, right to each person.
And I still don't understand, like, just going back to, like, it seems like an extraneous step that costs us money in our civil service. Like, why do you have to apply to Service Canada? If you've proven your eligibility.
They already know everything.
Exactly.
You already have that. Why are you not automatically getting that then? Why couldn't you do that? We're talking like hypotheticals, but they could be designing the program. See, I feel like when some of these things get rolled in, I'm trying not to be cynical, but you almost feel like it's being set up to fail.
It just seems that way.
And is it so that the rest of the populace, who, I don't know anybody who doesn't know somebody who's got a disability and doesn't know some of this, but is it so the general populace gets this impression that it's too complicated and therefore it's not the government's role? I feel like that's the message, that subliminal message is this is beyond us or something. I don't know.
Well,
if we are capable of designing a program that can work with your provincial and other social programs, and that this would do, part of our problem and our frustration, don't forget, is they put this on themselves. They announced it. They being the governing party that made this announcement of the Canada Disability Benefit, they put these expectations out there.
Yeah.
And then slowly,
and
let the
talk about under delivering, right?
then just we're not doing that.
Yeah. It's like one of my neighbors, Cheryl, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because like one of my neighbors said, well, they talked about the Canada Disability Benefit just recently, and said, well, it must be really difficult for them to get that out like 4.5 years later. And I said, yeah, it's deliberately done that way. He goes, well, there must be more to it. I mean, because otherwise, they would have got it out really quick. I mean, it must be pretty hard work. And I go, no, it's not. It's all about political decisions, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I think so. I think you're onto something there, bud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if you put 5 hurdles or 5 barriers in place of something, then somebody can say, well, I'll get through the first hurdle, that's fine, and maybe I'll get through the second hurdle, that's fine. But by the time you get to the third and fourth and fifth hurdle, like, it's just attrition, right? And I think, like you were saying, Cheryl, I think these programs are set up for attrition. They want people to get exhausted and just die and just kind of die off by attrition and just say, forget it. It's like I've went through 2 or 3 hurdles and now I'm just exhausted. I give up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I always give the metaphor of kicking the can down the road. Like, I don't want to deal with it. Another rainy day, it'll get dealt with, but you have to deal with the inevitable. Like the inevitable, you promised, the federal government promised something. You need to fulfill that agreement. You promise something. It's like, imagine anyone who during the pandemic was supposed to get CERB, right? Imagine saying, well, yeah, not right now. We need to work harder on it, and maybe eventually we'll get that to you. I mean, people would have been outraged. I mean, beyond outraged. And now here we are. I mean, 4.5 years later, and still no CDB. And I find it really disheartening of a promise, and they just can't fulfill that. And people suffering in poverty. And there's no need for people suffering in poverty in Canada. There's always a solution. Like as you mentioned, I mean, there's different versions. Like we can, GLBI or like some kind of basic income, or like the CDB for persons with disabilities, a basic floor of people where they can get by, and they, if they want to be an entrepreneur, or they want to maybe look at some kind of work if they can, or not, like, whatever, that option is now there, where they're not suffering in poverty because of the high market rents. And of course we can get into about taxation, but whatever. I mean, that's reducing market rents down, but I don't know, like, I like to try to problem solve things, and I look at just ways of try to fix the inequalities.
There's a lot of problems out there, right? And actually, before we hit live stream on today's, we were talking a bit about the provincial election here in BC. Yes. And I guess one of the things that I want to talk about is, and that we talked off air about, is that I'm actually glad that David Eby got a bit of humble pie handed to him a little bit. And I think the danger of the BC NDP is that they've become a party of announcements. It's like, let's announce this, and let's announce this, and let's announce this, and like, it's just a string of announcements, but they don't stop to actually deliver anything.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Neil.
Because I think that's the problem, is like at least stop and deliver something, and then say you're going to actually follow through on something. Because if you don't follow through on something, it's like, what's the point, right? You just never get anywhere.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Neil, because a former BC NDP premier way back in the 90s, people might be familiar, our listeners, Glenn Clark. And so Mo Meir Van Culler had his guest on just recently. The former Premier Glenn Clark came on and wanted his observation of what went wrong, like what happened here. And he says, well, David Eby, is, great guy. I know he means well in different ways, but the problem is that Glenn Clark says that he took on too much. He made too many promises and promises and promises, but he didn't deliver on them. And he said that's the problem. And so people went out to vote, and they said, well, affordability. you name it. I'm not going to go through all the different things, but I mean, affordability, cost of living, high market rents, taxes. People were just tapped out.
People need results and relief. There's so much tension. Like everybody's in survival mode now, like never before. It's affecting everything. You know, I don't know if all of your subscribers and who will be watching the live stream or listening know, like I'm in Ontario and I'm in Windsor, Ontario. And where my issues, like I look at that from a distance because we, like with our current government, with the Doug Ford conservative government, it's about cuts and placating these huge special interest investors, you know, that want to build something on an old, you know, public space property, Ontario Place, you know, where public dollars have gone into that. The space is ours and it's basically been privatized, and then making small, incremental and very technical regulatory changes almost on the regular, like every 3 weeks, about privatization of healthcare. So that you feel like that analogy of like the frog in boiling water. It's like it's boiling now and we're noticing, and huge. But what happens is with all of us, this affordability crisis, I'll just kind of blanket it that way, because no matter your income, okay, you can be envious of someone that's, you know, got a house that's bigger. They're trying to make mortgage payments too, or buying a car, or putting a kid through college, you know, hydro. Like we all have this affordability crisis, and that's to do with everyone. So the stress level for everyone, yes, it's a different category of stress when you're dealing with basic needs. I get that. But my point is this stress level that people have, it's very easy to dangle a scapegoat and just say, here's what the problem is. And there's no solutions. There's no proposals even to talk about, here's what we're going to try. Here's what we're going to do. Whereas I have found watching in the past, and of course I'm generalizing, but watching from one province to another, I always liked how BC historically has been like, we're going to do this, we're going to try this, and something that like a pilot project, however you want to coin it. And in Ontario, we do what's a safe bet for the corporate investors is the hard part, because it boils down to individuals. We have, I don't even know how many poor kids now. I think it's like 60,000 strong of, you know, little kids with autism that are on a wait list. The longer you wait, the more damaging it is. The earlier the intervention, the more positive the outcome for anything, right? So we're at this very high frustration level because certain things have been cut, and then you hear these announcements about, you know, subsidizing a private investor who's going to do something like that's totally out of the scope of government, I think. And that's the hard part, right? When you're talking about an issue like people living with disabilities, and we're trying to form this cohesive unit to be some kind of political force. Let's unify, let's get this done for people with disabilities. You come from all these different provinces, these different regions where the tensions are different, and it's so hard to get through to mainstream and say, people are choosing medical assisted dying because they can't afford to live. And that seems to be the shock value of that seems to be the only headline that takes in the mainstream media, and it's very very hurtful, very divisive in itself because it's so emotional. But how do we get this back to like make some of these constructive changes? Maybe they've never been done in your province before, but you know, under our constitution, okay, Section 91 is federal, Section 92 is provincial. There's a hell of a lot that's important to each and every Canadian that is up to their provincial government. Their provincial government is responsible. And like somehow we've got to be able to form this cohesive unit and say, we need all of our provinces and territories to be able to take this approach. And if one province wants to start and say, we're going to do this, it's never been done in Canada before, but it's proven in other jurisdictions. That's one of the things when, like, we have all of these resources from just from the UN Convention. Like we said, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, UN Convention on International Human Rights. There's a lot of resources there, and we could find best practices to be able to put something together. I don't know if you guys remember, but with this Ford government that was reelected after 4 years, so like almost 8 years ago, when they took over from Ontario provincial government, that the governing party was Liberal, had started a pilot project on universal basic income.
Right.
Yeah, basic income, yeah.
And that was all canceled. So all of the work, like the academic approach, you have to have that so that you are appealing to decision makers with evidence-based decision making. Right? That's what they need, the safe bet, right? You need to make it a safe bet for them. And this was supposed to be able to do that, come up with findings. And that's the really frustrating part. And just going back for a minute, like, it's very hard to, like, this cohesive unit we're talking about, just in the federal government alone for different things, like whether it's Service Canada or the Accessible Canada Act, or even the Disability Tax Certificate, like all these different definitions of disability. When the bottom line is, here's a person who is receiving their disability support program for their province. They qualified for that. Why can that not be the stepping stone or the gateway? I don't
automatically.
Whereas, and this disability tax certificate, I can see an argument for needing very specific things to get this specific benefit, but that should not be a gate to lead you to all these other things. It should be separate.
The gate should automatically be open. So when you're
and this is a separate thing. Exactly. That's how I take it.
I'm glad that you mentioned about the pilot project that was back in Ontario when the other administration was in for government, because BC at the same time was that they were just going to start their pilot project when they in 2017, when they had the CASA agreement with the Green Party in BC. And they started it. They were looking at it, and that's right exactly when the Ford administration came in and canceled it. And I think there was an agreement that they were going to keep it going in Ontario, but then Doug Ford decided to cancel it. And it actually, I was following it very closely, Cheryl, because I thought this is interesting. And the part I felt very interesting was that there were some individuals that were actually on the program as a pilot, and it changed their life in so many ways. They were able to, there was one lady who was able to get a new, either a new car or a used car, because the transportation just wasn't there for her. So she was able to get the car, go and get her groceries because it was too hard to carry. So she was able to load it up. She was able to go and get a small little business going for herself, being entrepreneur. And then they canceled the program. So she was able to put like 3 months worth of rent away ahead of time, so she'd be financially okay. And they canceled it, and she was actually in deeper poverty after. But there was something that was really disturbing I read on social media, but it actually does make sense. Talking about the priorities of the Doug Ford administration is that the person said, I'm struggling to put food on my table, let alone paying my bills, but Doug Ford can go and put booze on the shelf at grocery stores.
Oh, yeah.
I saw that. I was just like, oh, like, and I saw that Matheson. I thought, wow.
I'm really out of touch with it. Do you already have that in BC?
No, we don't.
No, you don't. Okay.
No, glad we don't.
No, but one thing I wanted to mention for your listeners too, I said I was in Windsor, right? Well, we're like, I can look out my window and see the skyline of Detroit over the Detroit River.
Oh, yes.
And so we see other jurisdictions and compare to that as well, which is a whole other story.
Yeah.
But my point is, no one was asking for this.
Yeah.
Convenience store thing. There's like a few of Doug's friends. Obviously, this wasn't a hue and cry from people.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it did make a cost. It's a cost. And the other thing too is when you have these crown corporations, these entities, like we have the retail store and the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, LCBO, and they sell booze, and Brewers Retail, the beer store it's called. That goes back into the general revenues of the government. That benefits everybody. Just like federally, Canada Post, when they make a profit, it goes back into the coffers of the federal government. It benefits everybody. Whereas the losses don't cost us one taxpayer dime. Your stamp goes up, service costs go up, right? And but it's the same idea, and we're just whittling away at these this social infrastructure that we do have, that the government relies on. We're just whittling away at it. It's slowly eroding. It's really interesting, Brent, when you talk, because I had forgotten about that. That was the scene stealer, right? You have all these other issues going on, and like, oh, great, now I can go to the, certain convenience stores, go and get your booze that no one was really.
You know what, Brent? We've reached the end of the podcast already, so we can do closing comments. It always goes fast, yeah.
It goes by really fast.
What I was going to say is, as my quick closing comment, thought was, the saying that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is futility, right? And I feel that government does that a lot. They do the same thing over and over again, and then they wonder, why are we getting the same result? I wonder why.
Well, why are people upset with us when no results being actually produced?
Yeah. Anyway, that's it for me.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'll just do my last thoughts then, just on what you said, Neil, and it's very easy to make people feel frustrated and divisive then, right? When you're in your own survival mode, and the government or narratives around a campaign to say this is what we want government to do. It's very easy to find scapegoats. And I want to tell you, the way that you solve our disability issues and our crisis that people living with disabilities have is to have the political courage to look at past reports that have been done and look at your recommendations for DTC for one, and for another, look at how you can use have the Canada Disability Benefit as a separate mechanism so it won't impact other social programs and won't get clawed back, and you can work with provinces, because that's ultimately the responsibility of the government to uphold human rights law, not just internationally but domestically, and this is a human rights issue.
Thank you, Cheryl. And that my final comments on today's segment pretty well echoes both of yours comment, Cheryl, and Neil's. I look at it as like a rinse and repeat situation when provincial government or federal government basically say, well, I hear you, like affordability is affecting people's lives. I mean, look at the divide. And we have to, as society, not divide people. Like, okay, well, we got seniors or people with disabilities. We're all citizens. But people with disabilities have disabilities, but they have to be recognized. But when I say not divide people with disabilities, where, okay, well, you can have subsidized housing, you can pay market housing. Oh, but you choose to have market housing, so you get to pay market rent. But hey, that was your choice. But you want subsidized housing, but you have to go on a long waiting list of 20 years. Sorry that you're suffering, but our government can't raise the rate.
That was your choice. That was your choice to suffer.
Yeah. And then the government says, well, we're going to wait till next year sometime, hoping that the federal government will actually maybe fix it. And the way I look at it is people are suffering now. And it's like those soundbite comments, it comes from governments and they say, well, people are suffering. I always say, like I said earlier in the podcast, be proactive. Listen to what citizens are saying or the residents in your provinces are saying. And as citizens of Canada, I always say that you're a resident in BC or whatever province that you're in, but you're a citizen of Canada. We need to take care of our citizens, regardless if they can work or they can't work. We need to, as society, come together and hold governments accountable and say, like I said, if you've made a promise, you need to commit to that promise and deliver social safety nets from all levels. If people are suffering, they're going to food banks. I mean, just to summarize everything, 2 million people going to food banks, regular families who never thought they would ever need to go to a food bank because they need to put food on the table for their children so that they don't go to bed hungry. And, so there's a problem where if people are having to go to food banks, there's definitely an underlying issue, especially when they don't get all those dietary supplements in food banks too.
We didn't talk about that, but that was the other headline besides the record-breaking use of food banks, people with scurvy.
Yes.
Which is absolutely a vitamin C deficiency.
Yeah.
So
crazy.
Yeah. And the other part, I like, as my closing comment too, it's all these other hurdles, like Cheryl, that when the government will say, well, you can apply for all these other extra supplements, they call them, but you have to have a whole bunch of different medical conditions in order to apply for it. The splashy headline saying vitamin supplement or nutritional supplement, but all those headlines, you need to have certain medical conditions. Like you need to be on dialysis treatments. You need to have a whole bunch of different, conditions. And I remember saying to my family doctor, him and I used to get to arguments. Brent, I can't sign for these things. I go, well, my worker told me to tell you to sign for them. Do you have this? I go, no, you don't. Do you have this and this? I go, no. I can't legally sign for something that you don't have a diagnosis for, just so that the government doesn't have to give you a rate increase. And so I guess
more barriers, right?
Well, that's what he said. It's more financial barriers, and to eliminate the red tape, they just have to take care of their citizens better. So I look forward to, Cheryl, I look forward to our next discussion on definitely
it was great
and the other topics.
Yeah, thanks again for the good discussion. Stay strong in solidarity.
I did
Yes.
want to say too, just
you,
before
Sarah.
we leave, that the chat was very lively today. Almost so lively that there was no way for me to even keep track of it all, because it was just
Oh.
like there's
Perfect.
so much
Well, it's
activity in
getting
the
very
chat today.
popular.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
It's getting
That's
very
what we want.
popular.
Yeah.
And I encourage people to subscribe, like, and share the content. If you are a person with disabilities, or you're an ally, and you have a disability, or anyone that has a disability, please reach out to us and come onto the show and talk about your lived experience. It's all connected all the way across the country, coast to coast to coast. Disabilities do not go away. They just progress as you get older. And so thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I'd like to have everyone join us on the future shows. Thanks you again to my guest, Cheryl Hardcastle, for joining me today. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.